Okay, is all of me in the picture?
It is, but the top of your head a little bit getting cut off. There we go.
How about that? Does that do it, or?
The other way.
Well,
Now more of hers cut
Now
off.
there's just, what is
There's
that?
an incoming call.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
I think you're fine.
And that won't matter for that, okay.
Right.
All right, so, let's go ahead and start this. Second, for fun. There we go. So in the background while I'm talking, this is, I was talking to everybody, in the background, I'm gonna let this play a little bit and we can run back and look at this later too, if anybody has questions about what they're looking at. But these are under the skin films made by a French hand surgeon 15 years ago of living, moving fascia. And you'll see a few things come up that look like diagrams. So you can kind of ignore those, but it's so interesting looking. So if you feel like if you want to scoot over here or so you can see it better, can you see okay from there? Okay, and I won't worry about it. I'm put the sound down. Okay. So, can you still see me? Okay.
No, now you're out of the screen.
More.
Okay, I'll just
Right
come over
there.
here. I'm
Right
gonna
there.
I'm gonna be in your way, I'm sorry. Okay,
We can just turn the phone if you want.
no, it's okay.
Okay.
I tested this a couple times. I know
Okay.
that this will mostly do it.
Okay.
All right. So, it's funny. I had a spot I was going to start from a question that you had, and I've lost that, so I'm just going to launch. I got my notes. Deep tissue without tears. I call this little one-night lecture that because I actually had a body worker a few months ago working on me who she was just a student. It was like one of those, not just a student, but she was a student, and it was in one of those little clinics at a massage school, and she was doing the massage on me. It was perfectly lovely. It was like this little rub and buff, and she's kind of chatting away, and she said, "Yeah, I don't do deep tissue. Nobody likes deep tissue. It hurts." And I was like, and I didn't say anything at the time. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And I've got a few other clients who I began working on recently who are like, oh, the last woman I worked on did deep tissue on me and it hurt so much. And I would hurt afterwards, and I finally just started saying, it's just actually it's not the deep tissue that's the problem. It's actually bad technique. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if a lot of people really don't understand the technique, and especially since we're going to be running this class, I thought it'd be really good to go through the technique, the practice of it, and also kind of the science behind it. And I really feel strongly about bringing in an element of play. A lot of what's been written about play, non-scientifically, kind of downplays the importance of play. It's, even in dictionary definitions, they talk about play as being something that's not done for any serious purpose. But anybody who's had kids know that play is serious business. It's the way that we human beings learn. And one of the reasons that we learn so well during play is because the stakes aren't very high. That's what distinguishes play from work or from life and death situations, is that the stakes aren't high. We're free to make mistakes. We're free to explore. We're free to imagine. We're free to, literally play. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I really want to try to encourage tonight as we explore is to also, find some ways to play with the concepts, play with the experience. So that was kind of my impetus for putting this class together. So I want to talk really briefly about science. There's a lot of talk out there in the broader community right now. You'll see it online, you see people in their adverts, and even I actually have to update my own website, which I haven't done in years, but I'm like, yeah, I gotta update this because it's not actually that accurate. People talk about fascia in ways that aren't very scientific. And what they talk about with fascia when they're doing deep tissue, say, we're stretching the fascia, we're unraveling the fascia, we're doing this stuff. And the more I've explored over the number of years, the less I'm convinced that's actually what's happening. Fascia is, does everybody know what fascia is? Should I give an update?
Yes.
I should give an update, yeah, that's fine. Fascia is one type of connective tissue, and connective tissue is what you're seeing here. it's this, and this is not connective tissue here. Let me just, connective tissue is, have you ever, here, let's just bring this ahead. Let's bring it back actually, because this is where the good pictures are. There. Connective tissue, if you've ever eaten chicken, you've eaten chicken probably, if you prepare chicken, you know, if you pull back the skin, you see that filmy stuff that's kind of translucent, and then if you peel the muscle apart, you see those little white fibers connecting the muscles one to each other, and if you pull the whole muscle, you see that tough stuff that connects it to the bone. And even if you take it all off the bone and then you see the stuff that wraps the bone itself, there's like there's a really firm rubbery coating on the bone. All that is fascia. Connective tissue is a much broader category. And what makes connective tissue different from other tissues like skin tissue or hair tissue is that it's actually a fairly featureless matrix. Like there's like a gelatinous part of the substance that's very kind of fluid, and there's these long strands of protein called collagen, and then interspersed in there very widely are these cells that produce those substances. But connective tissue itself does not have very many cells in it. And it has some nerve receptors, but they do produce their own contractions. But compared to muscular contraction, they're weak, and it seems as if those muscular contractions are at least partially involved in sensing stresses in, say, a long sheet of tissue, say a sheet of connective tissue that might start at the bottom of the foot, come up the inside of the leg, cross inside the pelvis, behind the intestines, and come up to the diaphragm, and it goes further up than that. But if you've ever done a big stretch over like a ball, and you feel that stretch that almost comes up into your throat, that's one long sheet of connective tissue that it goes all the way from the foot up to the tongue and the base of the skull. And it comes up through the inside of the body. And the muscles are embedded in that, and the bones are embedded in that, and the nerves are embedded in it, and the blood vessels and fat and organs are all embedded in this stuff that's basically a combination of a gelatinous, this very slippery gelatinous stuff, these protein fibers, and some widely scattered cells. So back to what people are talking about. People are talking about stretching fascia. What's really kind of happening, I think people use that term stretching because that's how Ida Rolf, the mother of structural integration, the woman who started this kind of body work, she and the osteopaths that she was working with talked about it as stretching fascia at that time. But back then, this was in the 50s, they didn't have high contrast radiographic dye films. They didn't have endoscopic cameras. They had their own hands, they had their own experience, they had a visceral lived experience of what it was like to stretch somebody. And when you move fascia, it feels like you're stretching it. What you're really doing is that you are stretching the individual muscle sarcomeres. A sarcomere is a section of a muscle cell. Muscle cells are big. They might be several millimeters long, which is really big for a cell, because a lot of cells are microscopic. Might be several millimeters long, and it's broken into sections. I've got a bunch of great links for people. If anybody's a complete science geek and really wants to know about this stuff, I got the films. I got the good films on this, and I'm going to send you guys all the links because they're fun. And I've got some with some people who are really interesting and funny. But so a muscle cell is broken up into these sections called sarcomeres, and each one of those sarcomeres contracts on their own. So these muscle cells contract, and they're all wrapped in fascia, and the fascia slides over each other. It is literally that slippery substance. The protein fibers give it toughness, which protects the muscles, protects the organs, protects the glands, the vessels, the nerves. So that fascia is really protective. It's a shock absorber, and it also allows gliding because it keeps muscle fibers from literally wearing on each other when they slide. It's like brake fluid. It's like lubricant. And the fascia is like the brake lining, so the muscles don't wear down and the joints don't wear down, because the synovial fluid in the joints, that's a type of connective tissue. The stuff that wraps the joints, that white stuff that wraps the joint, that's a type of connective tissue. Bone is a type of connective tissue. Bone is made up of this matrix of very dense rubbery stuff. Has anybody ever done the experiment where you take a chicken bone? I was going to do this and I didn't. Where you take a chicken bone and you stick it in vinegar for a week, and then you take it out and you go where you can bend it and tie knots with it, but it still looks exactly the same. It looks like a bone. Nobody's ever done that. Go on the web and look up. I'll try to find one for you. Chicken bone vinegar, because vinegar. Vinegar is a relatively strong acid, and it demineralizes bone. But what's left after you take all the calcium out of the bone is all this connective tissue, and that's why bones don't break when you jump and land on your feet. If you didn't have connective tissue in your bones, they'd shatter, because calcium. It's like if you take a piece of limestone and you throw it on a really hard surface, it's going to crack. Little chips are going to break off. That's what would happen to your bones if they weren't made of so much connective tissue. It's like the center of bones is this spongy type of connective tissue with all these holes. That's where all the blood vessels and a lot of the immune cells in the big bones there's actually stress receptors in the bone that are hydrostatic, that contain fluid that's in the connective tissue, that, like, if you're carrying a big weight, it's the pressure on those fluid-filled cells in the bone that goes, oh, we need to grow more bone. It's why astronauts lose bone mass in space. It's not just because they're not using it, it's because the sensors inside those little fluid-filled cells float in space because there's no gravity. That's why they lose bone so fast. Isn't that weird? So bone's a type of connective tissue. Blood is a type of connective tissue. Plasma is a really gooey, slippery substance that flows through the vessels. There are proteins and cells, blood cells, that flow through it. There's all these substances we don't normally think of as connective tissue that are connective tissue. But the one that we body workers work with is the myofascia. It's a combination of connective tissue, blood, nerve, and muscle. And there's some lymph in it too, but the lymph is a little separate, but it's still so closely involved, and we do work with it. So I've been on a little bit of a tear, and I've probably been off screen. So I'm going to move back over and ask any questions. Just take a moment and is there anything that bubbles up? Anything you didn't understand that I talked about? Anything? Nope.
The question I have is, you mentioned earlier about body workers using bad technique. Maybe this is a larger issue, but like
what's good technique as opposed to bad technique?
In a nutshell, like where would you go with that?
Let me actually, so we've really covered, I don't want to overwhelm you guys with science, so let's actually skip ahead to, I'll skip ahead a little bit to answer that question. Essentially, here's how muscle stretching works. So I'm going to answer that question in a roundabout way. Here's another thing that a lot of body workers will say, and I've said for years, and I still say it sometimes, and I always catch myself because it's an old habit. I go, oh, but most people like you, I could probably sit down and talk to you about it, but a lot of people, they're just not interested. So you give a simple explanation. But let me gather my thoughts for 1 minute because I'm on a tear. So bad technique. A lot of people have talked again about fascia as getting bound up and we need to unravel it. Well, if you take somebody who's really bound up, whose head is really forward and who's standing like this and who walks like this, and you anesthetize them completely, they go under complete anesthesia, somebody who can't lift their arm any higher than this, you can take their arm here, you can take it there, you can take their leg up to here, you can take their leg out to there, you can twist their spine around, and their body does not resist. Now, if it was actually a mechanical resistance in the fascia, a strictly mechanical restriction of fascia being stuck together, you wouldn't be able to do that. That would be like saying just because you anesthetized a piece of rope, suddenly you can make that rope longer. It's not how it works. What science has kind of figured out is that the mind has a memory, the brain has a memory for pain, The muscles have a memory for pain. And I don't mean memory the way some people talk about, oh, I have a memory stored in my tissue. When I get this work done, I cry and I remember this thing from my childhood. I'm talking about a memory the way that a rubber band has a memory. The way that if I take this rubber band and I stretch it out, it snaps back to here. Now a rubber band, so that's remembering how short it was originally. So when you stretch a muscle and you bring it out to here, it's only going to stretch as far as the brain says it's safe. As soon as it gets to a point where your body has chronically experienced pain in a stretch, your mind is going to go, that's it, no more, and it's going to send a signal to that muscle to contract, and you're not going to be able to pull it any further. If you use good technique, i.e. if you activate the parasympathetic nervous system in the process of doing the work, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, you can move past that restriction and give that person and that muscle a new experience of how much length they can take. And over time you can give them more and more and more, and because what you're actually doing is retraining the nervous system's expectations, you actually, that's the way I think. In science, they haven't completely figured this out again, but as a body worker who's read a lot of the science and has had 33 years of clinical experience, I would tell you that my experience is that the way bodies really change is that they learn something new. It's a learning process. Althea, come in a second. She's going to talk about psychophysical work.
No, I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. She teaches a type of movement work called psychophysical work.
Yeah.
A number of you have probably experienced that. That is strictly about that kind of retraining process, where you can lay on the floor and go through a range of movements, non-painful movements, and stand up and suddenly have much less restriction after half an hour of work that you then take throughout your day and on with you. And with a little bit of practice with that, you then can get rid of that restriction.
The one thing I would say though is that, so this work, I originally apprenticed with a Rolfer. This was originally based and it is, we still follow that format very much because honestly, nobody's made it better than I did.
Well, Tom Myers would disagree because he's got a different format, and I've looked at his format. It's pretty good, but this is a perfectly good one too.
Yeah. So anyway,
yeah,
but
there's
what
more
I
than
would
one way
say
to skin a cat.
is that what I think both of us have experienced and integrated into this work, was certainly with John, was the, back in the old days of Rolfing in the 60s, if you weren't screaming, it wasn't happening. That was the time of the primal scream and the 24-hour encounter groups, and if you weren't, having some dramatic thing, it wasn't happening. But actually, I think that was counterproductive.
Yeah.
And a lot of the reason is what Jane is saying here.
It's counterproductive for long-term physical learning. I mean, they got short-term fabulous results with that type of really what I would call violent work.
Yeah.
But it won't last because your body is going to remember pain and it's going to try to avoid that. I mean, they've done studies with microbes where they found out that even a single-celled microbe can learn to avoid pain.
Right. It's the basic binary.
It's like if they put a pain stimuli in with another stimuli, and then they take the pain stimuli away, that microbe will still avoid the other stimuli. And this is not even something with the brain as we would think of. It's an individual cell. So learning is innate to all life. It's how life has managed to survive the millennia. If life didn't learn how to avoid danger and go toward food or pleasure or whatever, we wouldn't be here.
Right. And the evolutionary urge is profoundly hedonistic.
It's profoundly hedonistic.
Yeah.
So the more good feeling you can create during your body work, the more learning you can give to the system, the more learning the system can take on. Now there is good evidence, good night honey, there is good evidence that small amounts of stress, like really carefully measured out amounts of stress, are also good for learning because they activate brain synapses in a way that make them more open to taking in new information. But but too much stress and everything shuts down and people go into what's called fight or flight. Everybody's heard of that, right? Fight or flight. Fight or flight is so there's two sides to the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is involved in pleasure, pain, breathing, heart rate, intestinal movement, digestion, muscles working. It's all the automatic and non-automatic stuff that our bodies do that needs movement. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight side. And it's the one that if you stress it too much, learning shuts down and it just says, I've got to survive this. And it's that no pain, no gain side that actually often it's the guys who say no pain, no gain, who say, I don't know why I can never stretch out my hamstrings. They won't get any longer. I mean, everybody's heard that, right? People say, I've stretched my hamstrings for 10 years and they're not any longer. I really push it. But the parasympathetic nervous system, that's called the rest and relax. And some people who are really hedonistic like to call it the feed and breathe cycle. That it's the part of you that likes to relax on a soft bed and your breathing slows and your skin pinks up because the blood isn't needed in the muscles and the internal organs because you got to run away from a lion. It can flow out to the skin as you relax and the circulation increases in your skin and you might break a slight sweat as you relax, or you might feel like a wave of pleasure as you like lay down and go, oh, and have something delicious to eat. And that kind of slowing of the breathing, that kind of thing, that's the parasympathetic nervous system kicking in. And those two things operate in balance. If the sympathetic nervous system kicks up, the parasympathetic cranks down. If the parasympathetic kicks up, the sympathetic cranks down. So what you want to do in body work is you want to create safety. That increases the parasympathetic nervous system response. You want to move slowly enough that the person can slow down and feel what's going on, and that kind of fine internal focus is a part of the parasympathetic nervous system response. Hello? Benita, come here.
Excuse
Give me a
us.
hug. Another student of mine. Oh, wonderful, Benita. Oh. Hello.
Look at you. So good to
Hi.
see you.
My name is Aiden.
Aiden,
Beverly-
are you the
yeah.
chiropractor?
Yeah.
Yeah, this
Beverly
is,
introduced
yeah,
me.
let's get a couple more chairs.
Does that one work? The seat is open.
Good to see you.
Good to
Good to
see
see you.
These chairs are a little funny.
Hi.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. We're filming. Oh, do you want to just, well, you can't see these chairs are pretty great, but they're also pretty awful to set
Yeah,
up.
I could sit
Please,
here.
please forgive
Okay.
me for being so forgive me for being so late, Jane.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's okay. No, it's all right. That's why we're recording it, even if it's a messy recording. So we were just talking about the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So I don't need to catch you up on that. You know all about that. You're a NUCA chiropractor.
Yes, I
right?
do.
Does that, just because it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to refer to it a little later, just really briefly, does everybody know what NUCA chiropractic is? You want to say? You would say better than I would.
Okay. I work at McPeterson. It's called upper cervical chiropractic. Part of the technique is called NUCA. We're focusing on head and neck.
Yeah, especially that first
Yeah, the
cervical
first
vertebrae.
bone. We believe there's a big impact on the quality of nervous system function. So.
And I'm gonna jump in and just say that one of the things that's interesting about that is there's a series of muscles at the back of the neck called the suboccipital muscles, and they have per gram of tissue, those little teeny tiny muscles at the back of the neck. I mean, they're not teeny tiny, but they're pretty small compared to like a thigh muscle or a butt muscle. They have like 37, is it myofibrils? Like the receptors per gram of tissue back there. They're super sensitive. 0.7 per gram of tissue. So we're talking the stuff at the base of the neck, hugely sensitive, hugely influential in terms of proprioception, knowing where you are in space. There's a whole session in structural work that is devoted to the head, neck, and shoulders. And honestly, Althea and I both agree that often you need to do 2 sessions on the head, neck, and shoulders. Because if you really can't help a person find that place where their head really floats and balances itself, you'll never get everything else stacked up underneath it. Now, we also can think that we also have 3 sessions on the pelvis, because the pelvis is also critical. If you don't have a good base underneath that head and neck, you won't have the support for it, and it's hard to keep that balance. So these things work together. So back to your question, Tavio, about what makes good body work as opposed to bad body work. Good body work is, and I'm going to talk non-scientifically at this point, and we've talked experientially. It's slow, it's respectful, the practitioner pays close attention to how fast that tissue is moving and does not push the tissue, or if they're going to push, just enough to make sure, because sometimes people will not have very good sensing in areas of tissue that you're going to work on, and so sometimes you'll press in just enough to kind of wake that up, and then you back off just a little bit and then let it move and you follow it. And this is actually, I was going to save this for after, during the play section, but I'm going to pass this around now. The only thing is I need to grab some paper towels. And we'll talk about, so as this goes around, you'll each take a paper towel and pass this bowl. Here's what I'm going to show you. This is cornstarch and water. A lot of people have probably seen this on, better get in front of the video. Has everybody seen stuff about cornstarch and water on YouTube? It's what's called a non-Newtonian fluid. It has thixotropic properties. Basically, if you move quickly into cornstarch, it acts like solid. Boom, 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 boom. I can't penetrate this. Can you guys see?
Yeah.
Can't penetrate it? If I just go like this, let my fingers sink, it's going to go all the way in.
Wow.
I saw they were making speed bumps out of non-Newtonian fluids. Like if you hit it at a certain
This is
speed,
our
it'll
chemist.
rock you, but if you go over it slow, it'll just like get out of the way.
Yep, yeah, so, and if I move a little bit like this, still being, again, respectful of how much I'm going all the way to the bottom. And then if I try to come out fast, it grabs me. And if I come out slowly, it's like a Chinese finger trap, I come right out. The other thing is I can go a little quickly over the surface, or I can sink in and move and keep going slowly deeper and deeper into it. And that's how myofascial tissue moves. If you look at that, I'm just sinking right in. And that's what'll happen is you'll feel that tissue start to move like that under your fingers. And that's when you know you've got your groove on, as they say. So, and so an interesting factoid is one of the glycoproteins, a protein sugar molecule combination that's found in synovial fluid, in connective tissue fluid in general, in the gel, is hyaluronic acid. And it's a thixotropic, like this. You can't compress it out of joints. If like it's in the joints, if you jump, it becomes more solid. When you hit like that, it becomes more solid. It does not allow the knee to compress on itself. If you sink down really slowly, then that knee will compress slowly. So it acts like this. So that's fun. We'll keep you guys awake while I'm babbling. Yeah, they've actually got, I think Mythbusters did a whole thing where they filled this huge, little runway area with cornstarch and water, and people were running across it, and they'd stand in it and they'd sink down to here. Yeah. So, and I do think it's interesting that hyaluronic acid functions like a non-Newtonian fluid as well. It's like one of the really cool things about bodies. Let me see where I was at. Did that answer your question, Tavio?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just to make sure I get through it, I splattered myself. I'm gonna there's, in addition to collagen fibers, there are fibers in connective tissue called elastin, and those function even more like rubber bands, that they're much stretchier. And that the real stretchiness of connective tissue comes from the elastin fibers in it, which are, again, one type of protein. But again, a lot of the stretchiness of connective tissue comes because of its sliding properties, the ability of those collagen fibers to slide over one another as a result of that kind of fluid. I'm going to actually pass this from the other end. Collagen is protein. Let me actually tell you what. let me take some of these. And the slower you go in, the more it's gonna let you go. If we run out of these before the middle, I'm gonna hand this to you. You can pass these over. So what I've got here, so collagen is basically, gelatin is collagen. Animal gelatin is collagen that's been removed from the body, had everything else cleaned out of it, and it's ground up and powdered. It is extremely hydrophilic. It loves water. It's like if you've ever just sprinkled plain gelatin over water, it soaks up that water so fast. So this is about twice the density of Jell-O, of like the mixture of Jell-O. But what I've got here is collagen. This one, this plain colored one, you'll see, it's a little drier now than when I made it, but you'll feel how slippery it is. That's why I'm handing around the things. And you can feel, I'd really like to pass this rubber band around first. As you play with this rubber band, try to rub it against itself, and you feel how even though it rubs, it's kind of scratchy. That's how tendons would be without connective tissue. So just have that as an initial experience, kind of hold it and rub one side of that band against another. And then we're going to let you kind of rub this rubber band over the gelatin. You can play with the gelatin a little bit, squeeze it, you can feel how slippery it is, and you want to set it in your lap, and you can run it over and feel how much more slippery it is. Now the interesting thing about just the collagen is you'll feel if you rub long enough, it starts to get kind of stiff and sticky again. And I'm going to show you something else. So what I have in this other bowl is, this is the really good one. The second bowl is gelatin and corn syrup, and what you'll find is that it's actually slightly more slippery. It's the addition of, it's the glyco part. Like that stuff makes it just a little more slippery, a little more wet feeling. So it increases it's like there are certain things in chemistry, and we'll know this, called wetting agents. They make water feel wetter, and sugars kind of function like that a little bit. They can make water feel more slippery, a little wetter. So I know this is thrilling. Everybody's playing in Jell-O. Now the really fun one is when you take that first mixture and you actually put cornstarch in it. Then it actually has some of those non-Newtonian fluid properties. It's not so much as a joint fluid would be. The joint fluid is almost strictly like, there's almost all hyaluronic acid, much more non-Newtonian, but this, when you slide the rubber band with it, it's really slippery, and because the cornstarch adheres to the rubber band in a particular way, the way that the hyaluronic acid is also attracted to that tissue and is not easily squeezed out,